Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Nazir, Daf Lamed Aleph. Today's stuff is dedicated in memory of Faye Derek, one of Hadran's dedicated learners who passed away yesterday. Yihi Zichra Baruch. Okay, today we're starting a new chapter and a whole different thing. Bit of a challenging daf, I will warn you, but try to organize it as best as we can. We're going to start off with laws of hekdesh, of sanctifying items, and eventually we'll get back to Nazir and how this connects. Right now, we kind of leave the world of Nazir and into something else, and as I said, they will connect in the later Mishnayot. Beit Shamai Omrim, we're starting at the very bottom of Lamed Amud Bet. Beit Shamai Omrim, hekdesh ta'ut hekdesh. Beit Shamai says, big important statement, if you sanctify something by mistake, it's sanctified. Beit Hillel omrim ein hekdesh. Beit Hillel say that is not hekdesh. You have to, in order for sanctification to take effect, has to be it was intentional, it was a mistake, it doesn't work. Kitzad, what would be the case? And here things get complicated. Okay, the first line is not too complicated, but this case becomes a little bit complicated. We'll read it simply. I'll probably not give too many details because we're going to see three different explanations of this case in the Mishna. Kitzad, Amar shor shachor sheyetzeh mi Beit Rishon. You say okay, how exactly to translate this is tricky, but the black ox that comes out of my house first, that will be hekdesh. V'yatza lavan, and a white one came out instead. It sounds a lot like Yiftach with his daughter, right? So it's unclear what exactly this person meant. Did he mean the first black one to come out, and then a white one came out, and then why should that be sanctified? That's wasn't even what he was talking about. Or did he mean the first thing to come out, but he said it was be black, and then it turned out it was white, right? So the simple understanding is he assumed that the first one was going to come out was black, and it turns out it was white. So the white one becomes sanctified. Let's just go with that. It's a little hard not to explain this yet in detail, but let's assume that's what it means. The white one becomes sanctified. That was the mistake. Beit Shamai omrim hekdesh, Beit Hillel omrim eino hekdesh. So Beit Shamai will say, assuming we're talking about the white one would be sanctified, and Beit Hillel says it is not sanctified, right? Again, the first one that came out, even though it wasn't black, wasn't what he was expecting, Beit Shamai says, well, it's a mistake, but it works. Same case, we're now going to have two other cases, same idea. Dinar zahav she'aleh biyadi rishon, a gold dinar that comes out of my pocket first. Hareu hekdesh, right? The first coin I pick up out of my pocket or my wallet will be hekdesh. V'ala shel kesef, and it turns out it wasn't gold; it was silver, the one that came out. Beit Shamai omrim hekdesh, Beit Hillel omrim eino hekdesh. Same idea, right? It's hekdesh or it's not hekdesh. Chavit shel yayin, the first barrel shetaleh biyadi, the first barrel of wine that's going to come out. Again, exactly what it means come out, I don't know, that I'm going to come in contact with, that I'm going to, right, you don't actually pick up a barrel of wine and out of your pocket, but the first one I get to will be hekdesh, harei hekdesh, val tashel shemen, and then it turns out it was oil and it wasn't wine. Beit Shamai omrim hekdesh, Beit Hillel omrim eino hekdesh. So the simple reading is, you meant the first thing, but you said it about something specific, and then it turns out it was something else. And then that something else becomes sanctified according to Beit Shammai. We're going to mostly focus on Beit Shammai because we want to try to understand how could you possibly say these are hekdesh. So Beit Shammai omrim hekdesh. Now we're in the Gemara, and the Gemara is going to ask the first question: Mai ta'amayu to Beit Shammai? What is the reason for Beit Shammai? Diyalfinan tfilat hekdesh misok hekdesh. These are catchphrases for other things. Tfilat hekdesh is what you would think, which is in order to make hekdesh go onto something. That's tfilat hekdesh. It's the bringing of sanctification onto something where there was no sanctification to begin with. Sof hekdesh isn't exactly the end of hekdesh, but what it means is if I transfer kedusha from something where there was already sanctification. So what I'm doing is it's like later on in the process, because I already have something that's sanctified, and I'm moving the sanctification to something else. What is that? Tmura. If you remember Tmura, we always come across it. Tmura is a case where I have an animal I sanctified, and I want to say, instead of that animal, I want to take this one, and I move the sanctity to the other. It's a little bit tricky because I can't really do that. And it's forbidden, number one, by Torah law, but it's effective. Effective in a partial way. Effective in the fact that I've now sanctified the second one, but not effective because I haven't removed the sanctity of the first. So I basically made the second one sanctified as well. And now the issue is, what do we say? And what does this have to do with anything? So self-hekdesh, all I explained to you so far was that self-hekdesh is another phrase for tamura. It's saying what happens in a tamura case when I take sanctity that's already existing and I move it onto something else. Again, move it doesn't mean I've removed it from the first one, just to be clear. In any case, ma tamura afilu b'ta'ut, af hekdesh afilu b'ta'ut. So now we're going to say, tfilat hekdesh is just like tamura, in the sense that what? Comes Beit Shamai and says, everyone agrees that tamura by mistake works. What is tamura by mistake? So the Mefarish gives an example. If I say, this animal is going to be in place of my other animal, which is a korban olah, and it turns out it was a korban shlamim. Okay, I was mistaken about the sanctity of the first animal. Okay, I got confused about which sacrifice it was. And I said, this one's going to be instead of an olah, and it was actually really a shlamim. That would be an example of a tamura that was a mistake. Okay, where I was mistaken somehow about the identity or the something about the first animal, it's still effective. I can still transfer the kedusha even though I was wrong about what it was. So since that works b'ta'ut, comes Beit Shamai and says this should also work b'ta'ut. Beit Hillel omrim hani mili tamura. That's different. Tamura, you're already taking something that was already sanctified and you're moving it to something else. That can work by mistake. Aval achute hekdesh b'ta'ut lo machatinan. Achute and machatinan is from the shorish of nachat. Nachat is to go down. Okay, like nichitot are landings in the airport. So achute hekdesh to make hekdesh fall onto something by mistake, lo machatinan. You can't place hekdesh on something where there was no sanctity by mistake. Says you can't learn it from tamura. Tamura, there's already something sanctified. That's different. Maybe easier to transfer the kedusha even by mistake, but not. You can't compare tfilat hekdesh to self hekdesh. And that, according to the Gemara, is the basic machloket between them, the reason for the machloket. Do we learn it from tamura or not? But now we're going to ask a question. Assuming that we understand Beit Shamai the way I explained the Mishna, which is what? I said the first black ox that comes out the door will be hekdesh. What I really was intending was the first animal that comes out, but I assumed it was going to be my black ox. And it turns out it was a white ox. The white ox is sanctified because it was a mistake. I said black. I really should have said any ox, but I said black. Turns out it was white. The white one's sanctified. The Gemara is now going to raise a question on that interpretation. Beit Shamai, ma ilu amar, hare ze tachat ze lechatzi hayom, mi havya tmura me'ahishata. If we're going to learn this off from tmura. So let's say I have an animal I sanctified, and now I want to replace it with another animal. Substitutions, tmura. And I say, this animal will be in place of that animal starting from midday. So, mi havya tmura me'ahishata, is that animal sanctified from the moment I made that declaration? No. I said that the declaration is going to happen at a specific point in time, right? The sanctification. So, okay, until midday, it's not going to be, right? It's not going to be sanctified. Hachinami. So why don't we say the same thing by us? What did he really say? He said the first black ox that comes out the door. So hachinami, lechimagalya milta. When that actually happens, why are we assuming that it takes place immediately and whatever comes out the door first is going to be sanctified? He was referring to a black ox that comes out the door. Meaning, why don't we just wait till the first black ox comes out the door later in the day, whenever that happens? In other words, just like you can say it tomorrow will take effect at a certain point in time, this person was saying, I want the animal, the sanctification of this animal to take effect when the first black ox walks out my door. What they're basically saying is, what does the white ox have to do with anything? The white ox was not part of what I was even referring to. This isn't a mistake. I wasn't referring at all to a white ox. So the fact that a white ox came out first is totally irrelevant. How can you say that Kedusha goes on? Yeah, you could say Hekdesh b'ta'ud is Hekdesh, but still the white animal wouldn't be sanctified because the white animal wasn't what I was referring to. I was referring to when the black animal comes out. I want the first one to be sanctified when the black, oxen start coming out the door. So I wasn't referring to the white ones at all. How on earth could Beit Shammai say that the white one is going to be sanctified? That leads us to option number 2. Notice that option number 1 wasn't said in the name of anybody. It was just the Gemara kind of assuming this was the interpretation. Now we're going to have 2 different interpretations. So it'll take us a while to get to the second one. We're going to go to Rav Papa and we're going to go to Abai. What we basically have in the structure of today's daf, it's a bit of a complicated, the content is complicated, but the structure is pretty clear. We have explanation number 1, right, where we gave the reasoning behind and then kind of what we assumed Beit Shamai was saying, raised a question on it. As a result, we're going to move on now to Rav Papa. We're going to ask a few questions on Rav Papa's explanation, and then we're going to move on to Abai. Okay, and then we're going to ask some questions on him and resolve all the questions on the other commentaries will be resolved. Amar Rav Papa, lechach ne'emar rishon, lechashiyetze rishon. What he really meant was what we just said. When the first black ox comes out, it will be sanctified. So when the first black ox comes out, that black ox is sanctified. According to our Papa, it's not the white ox that's sanctified. It's the black one that's sanctified. What's the biggest problem according to this interpretation? Think about it. What's the mistake then? There's no mistake really, right? You said the first black ox and the first black ox is sanctified. Doesn't make any sense that we're calling this hekdesh b'ta'ut. So hold off on that. We're going to get to that question, but not yet. First, they have some other question. But we never said in the Mishna that there were many black oxen owned by this person in his house. He said, a black ox will come out of my house, Rishon, right? When it comes out first, it will be sanctified. Not clear why the Gemara assumes this, but the Gemara says, who's to say he has many black oxen? It never tells us that. It would sound like this would be true even if he had one black ox. And then it doesn't make any sense to say, but why would you explain the cases? I want the first black one to go out. Maybe he has one black ox and he has a white one and he has a red one and we don't know, but right, maybe what he meant was whichever one comes out first. And then back to interpretation number 1. And what he was saying is, I assume my black one's going to come out first, and that's not what happened, and that's the mistake. So the Gemara says, "Lo tzricha le train svata." Now, you would have to say the only way to read the Mishnah is that he must have, and that's again according to our Papa, is that he must have had a number of shvarim in his house, 2, 3, right? Could be more, but he has to have at least 2 or 3. Otherwise, this really doesn't make sense. So again, the situation is, let's just go back. We resolved question number 1, which was not the strongest question anyway. But it was saying, sounds like the Mishnah could be referring there was just one ox. They said, no, that definitely isn't the case. You would have to assume there's more than one black ox. And what he really meant is the first of my black ox that comes out will be sanctified. Okay, and that fits with Rav Papa. But now we have another question. Beit Hillel, im ken? So now we have to explain what's Beit Hillel. Okay, now Beit Hillel is also a problem. Forget about the fact that it doesn't even look like a mistake. How's Beit Hillel going to say, why isn't your black ox sanctified? Should totally be. You said the first black ox that comes out of my house and the first black ox came out should be sanctified. So what will they say? Im ken sheyetze berishon mebayla. Again, he's being very careful about the reading of the text. Now, it's not clear, and there's different ways to interpret this. I'll go with one interpretation that made the most sense to me. The Mishnah reads like this: Shor shachol sheyetze mibeiti rishon. The black ox that comes out of my house first. Now, what Beit Hillel is saying, if you really meant what Beit Shamai thinks you mean, according to the way Rav Papa understands, we have a lot of people explaining a lot of people, we have Beit Shammai's approach is, what you really meant was the first black ox to leave my house. And you weren't referring to white or anything else at all. So comes Beit Hillel and he says, if that was true, and as I think you were referring also to the white ones. And what you were saying was, the black one's going to come out first, and you were wrong, and therefore it's not sanctified, because hekdesh b'ta'ut isn't hekdesh. How do I know that? Because if you wanted to say the first black one to come out, what would you have said? Shor shachol sheyatza berishon mibeiti. Your emphasis would have been on first, the first one to come out. So you would have said, instead of saying from my house first, you would have said first from my house, because you wanted to get to first is what's more important to you. The assumption is that you put the more important word first. Okay, no play on words intended, no pun intended. So you basically should have said the black ox that comes out first from my house, as opposed to what you said was the black ox that comes out of my house first. So when you said comes out of my house, it means you really want the first one that comes out of your house. And what you were assuming was it was going to be black, and it turned out to be white, and that was your mistake, and therefore nothing's sanctified. So that's the machlokah. What's the problem? The biggest problem with this interpretation, Amar le Rava mi Barnish, le Rav Ashi. Rava from Barnish says to Rav Ashi, hi, hekdesh b'ta'utu. This is not hekdesh b'ta'ut. Hekdesh b'chavanau. He got exactly what he intended. He intended the first black ox, and the first black ox is what he got. So how could you possibly put this in a Mishnah where the subject line of the Mishnah is Beit Shamai omrim hekdesh ta'ut hekdesh, and then the Mishnah said, how? And you bring this case. This is not hekdesh b'ta'ut. To which the Gemara answers, Mishum de'at i'e l'dibura kam. Now, how you exactly explain this is a good question. Again, different interpretations, but what it means here, hekdesh b'ta'ut, you mean that they use the same root. At a is from ta'ut. You misled people, maybe you could say, or his first words were misleading. They were ambiguous. They were confusing. Okay? Basically, it wasn't clear what he meant. And how do we know? First of all, we have this halacha, Beit Shamai, Beit Hillel. What did you mean? Did you mean the first animal to leave the house, or did you mean the first black? Right, and you meant, I assume the first animal is going to be a black ox, or did you mean the first of the black oxen to leave the house? So, because it was a confusing statement, what Beit Shammai says is, even though it was a very ambiguous statement, it's still going to be hekdesh. And then we have a different meaning of what hekdesh b'ta'ut means. Hekdesh b'ta'ut doesn't mean you made a mistake. Hekdesh b'ta'ut means you weren't clear about your declaration. And Beit Shammai still thinks that it's hekdesh. Okay? This is very similar, by the way, to what we learned in Nidarim about all these languages, how you say it and what you say and how clear it has to be. So now that's how we explain Rav Papa. Rav Papa says it's the first black. That's the one that's going to be sanctified according to Beit Shammai. According to Beit Hillel, it's not, because maybe you meant the first one to leave the house, and that's right. And that one was white and not black. And we basically said hekdesh b'ta'ut doesn't really mean hekdesh b'ta'ut. It means you made some ambiguous, unclear statement that could be misleading. I like to use the word misleading because it has to have something of mistake, right? It's more of a word that has the root, again, in Hebrew, it has the root at ea, which is the same root. Anyway, different ways to explain that word. But now the Gemara is going to say, okay, so based on what you're saying, Beit Shammai doesn't really think that hekdesh b'ta'ut in its literal meaning, mistaken hekdesh is valid, right? Because once we reinterpret this Mishnah, we now would come to the conclusion, if it's an ambiguous statement, it's still going to be hekdesh. But when is it not going to be hekdesh? If it's a real legitimate mistake. We're going to raise two questions from the next upcoming Mishnayot on that right now. V'savrei Beit Shammai, hekdesh b'ta'ut lo have hekdesh? Does Beit Shammai really hold then that a real mistake doesn't work? The Hadran, the next Mishnah that we're going to see at the end of today's daf. Mishna nadar ben Nazir, v'nish'al chachamim b'hitiro. I made a neder to be a Nazir. And I actually then went again, according to many commentators, I went against my neder. I drank wine, let's say. Or it doesn't really matter. We'll see that case when we get there. But in any case, then nish'al chachamim. Then I went to the rabbis and I said, I really want to get rid of my neder. B'hitiru, and it worked. Okay, they remember all the methods, hetach, hakata, regret, or some sort of explanation. Okay, I didn't understand the ramifications, and they undo my neder. But I already had an animal that I sanctified for the sacrifice. What happens to that animal? This is agreed upon by everybody. That animal goes back to the herd. It's as if nothing happened to it. Now, wouldn't you call that hekdesh b'ta'ut, right? Because in the end, retroactively, my Nazir was wiped out. So you could say that was a hekdesh by mistake, because I thought I was a Nazir. In the end, I wasn't a Nazir. So comes Beit Hillel to Beit Shamai. I'm a Beit Hillel to Beit Shamai. Don't you at least agree with me? In other words, you think hekdesh b'ta'ut is hekdesh. But look at this case. This case proves that hekdesh b'ta'ut is not hekdesh, because look, right? Don't you agree with me that that he goes back? Everyone agrees about this law. Even you agree with it, which means that you don't really believe that hekdesh b'ta'ut is hekdesh. This is big, and this is why the Mishnah is the next Mishnah, and why this connects with Nazir. We brought this whole thing here because Beit Hillel are going to question Beit Shammai based on this halacha and say, how could you say hekdesh b'ta'ut is hekdesh? Now, from here, what can you obviously infer? Michlal, the Saver Beit Shammai, hekdesh b'ta'ut have a hekdesh. Right? Isn't it clear then that they do think if you make a mistaken hekdesh, it's going to be hekdesh. So you can't say what we just said as we just explained our Mishnah saying it's not really hekdesh b'ta'ut. And then assuming that if it's not really hekdesh b'ta'ut, then what would Beit Shamai say about hekdesh that was really a mistake? It wouldn't be hekdesh. But here from the next Mishnah, you see that Beit Hillel clearly said to Beit Shamai, according to your logic, this animal should be sanctified because you think mistaken hekdesh works. So the obvious answer is, El Beit Hillel hu dekatau. Beit Hillel misunderstood Beit Shamai. This is only Beit Hillel quoting Beit Shamai and saying, wouldn't you agree? And therefore you're wrong about hekdesh b'ta'ut. But maybe they misunderstood Beit Shamai. Savru, they thought, Beit Shamai mishum de hekdesh b'ta'ut hekdesh. They took the words literally, thinking that Beit Shamai says mistaken hekdesh is hekdesh. But Amr lahom Beit Shamai, and then Beit Shamai could respond to them and say, no. La mishum hekdesh b'ta'utu, and la mishum da'atei l'dibur kama. Now, you would have expected if that's the case, Beit Shamai would have said this in the Mishnah, and they don't. But what they're saying is, this doesn't necessarily raise a question because Beit Shamai could just, the fact that Beit Hillel raises a question against Beit Shamai saying hekdesh, that's a mistake is hekdesh, could just mean that they misunderstood Beit Shamai. Really, Beit Shamai meant when you said this unclear statement and misled people with it, it's still going to be hekdesh. We still go by what you really meant, even though it wasn't clear in the beginning, and people could have been confused about what you meant. But that's a way to explain it. It's a weak answer because the Mishnah doesn't really follow that. The Mishnah seems to have this discussion with them about hekdesh b'ta'ut. And anyway, we're going to have a second question and we're going to answer it differently, which is going to resolve this question as well. So it's a weak answer, but we have a better answer going forward. What they're really saying in a nutshell is, don't assume we can learn from Beit Shammai when Beit Hillel quotes them, because you're just hearing about Beit Shammai from Beit Hillel, but maybe they misunderstood. And that's a common explanation in the Gemara, where we basically have somebody who explains something in a particular way of someone else's, and then we could say, oh, they just didn't understand them properly, which happens all the time. People always misquote people and misunderstand them. But again, we're going to raise the exact same question. Okay, so you're still on this, that Savrei Beit Shammai hekdesh b'ta'ut lo have hekdesh. So again, if it's really a mistake, Beit Shammai, we assume right now, is not going to hold that it's actually hekdesh. Is that really true? Tashma, let's learn from here. Another Mishnah coming up on tomorrow's time. Hayu mahachim baderech. There were two people walking on a path. Ve'echad ba kenegdam, and they see a friend in a distance. Ve'amar echad, somebody says, Hareini Nazir shezeh ploni. I'm sure, if someone's coming in a distance and you try to identify them, sure, it's this person. I'm going to be a Nazir if it's this person. And the other one says, I'm certain it's not that person. Ve'echad hareini Nazir she'ein zeh ploni. I'm certain it's not that person, and I'm willing to bet on it. I'll be a Nazir if it's not that person. Comes a third person walking with them. Hareini Nazir she'echad mikem Nazir. I'm going to be a Nazir if one of you becomes a Nazir. She'ein echad mikem Nazir. Fourth person is there, says, I'm going to be a Nazir if neither of you is a Nazir. Now, by the way, that can't be, because one of them is going to be a Nazir, because one of them is right and one of them is wrong. Because one said, it's not like one said, I know it's this person, one said, I know it's that person, one said, I know it's this person, and the other one said, it's definitely not right. I know it's not that person. So only one of them is right. The fifth person says, I'll be a Nazir if you both become Nazirim, which should seem like that won't happen because only one of them is going to be, because only one of them is right. The sixth person comes and says, I'll be a Nazir if all five of you are Nazirim. Very complicated case. We'll get to it when we see it in the Mishnah tomorrow. Beit Shamai omrim kulam Nazirim. Beit Shamai says every single person, all six people are Nazirim. Now, halacha hekdesh b'ta'utu v'katane kulam Nazirim. Obviously, some are mistaken, right? In other words, what's going to happen? Number one goes and says, I'm a Nazir if it's this person. If it's this person, he's a Nazir, and then the other person isn't. But the other person said, I'm going to be a Nazir if it's not that person. Let's say it wasn't that person. But I'm sorry, let's say it was that person, the other one thought. He was wrong, but he was so sure he was right that it's hekdesh b'ta'ut. He basically meant to take upon Nazilut. You see, by the way, the correlation of Nazilut and hekdesh, they're treated similarly. So, because also in Nazir is kadosh yehiyeh, he's sanctified. Anyway, basically, all these people, theoretically, or the way the Gemara understands it right now, is saying they made a mistake, right? One thought maybe both are going to be Nazirim, and therefore he said, I'll be a Nazir, right? In the end, both are Nazirim because the one was mistaken, one was accurate, but mistaken Nazir becomes a Nazir, okay? So basically, one said if only one of you was a Nazir, because he thought only one of them would be a Nazir. One said, right, he thought maybe none of them would be Nazirim, but he said, I'm going to be a Nazir if that's the case. Everyone, or a bunch of them, could be mistaken, but they all become Nazirim anyway. So here you see that Beit Shammai says Hekdesh B'Ta'ut is Hekdesh. There's really no way around that. Amre, so in the end they say, and I told you this could resolve the first question as well, Savre Beit Shammai Hekdesh B'Ta'ut Habe Hekdesh, V'Hachalo. Beit Shammai really does hold Hekdesh B'Ta'ut is Hekdesh, but not in our Mishna. In other words, our Mishna is talking about something else. Our Mishna is talking about when you made this unclear statement and you misled people. That's one thing. Of course, he holds Hekdesh B'Ta'ut is Hekdesh, but that's just not what our Mishnah is referring to, and that resolves Rav Papa. Because again, Rav Papa's biggest difficulty is it says Hekdesh B'Ta'ut is Hekdesh, and then it explains how is that the case. To which we explain, well, there's different variations of Hekdesh B'Ta'ut. This is one of them, which doesn't really mean the simple reading, which is if you were confusing about your statement, you really knew what you meant, but people thought maybe you'd be referring to the first thing that left your house. That's still going to be Hekdesh. And in the upcoming Mishnayot, again, the next one and the one after that are all talking about cases where you actually made a mistake. And that's also Hekdesh. But you don't have to explain our Mishnah that way because our Mishnah doesn't work out that way. Because the white one coming out is not a mistake. The white one, again, this was the problem he had with the first interpretation. You weren't referring to that at all. It's not like it's a mistake. That's not what you meant. What you meant was the first black one that comes out. That's the way they assume the Mishnah means, which means you clearly weren't referring to the white one, which means it's not even a mistake. Okay, so they had to explain mistake in a different way, which is a big weakness in this parshanut. Because to say that Hekdesh B'Ta'ut in one place means one thing and another place means another is a little bit confusing. However, it does resolve the problem we have at the beginning, which is if you clearly weren't referring to the white one, how could the white one be sanctified? And again, using that example of Tamura, what you really meant was when the first black one comes out, that's the one that's going to be sanctified. So how could you possibly say, oh, the white one's sanctified by mistake? It wasn't sanctified by mistake. You weren't referring to it in the slightest. So that's option number 2. Option number 3, Abaye Amar. Okay, so, and again, just to review, let's review right now so we don't get lost in the daf. We basically had our Mishnah, then we brought the explanation for Beit Shamai, Beit Hillel. From that, we raised a question. Beit Shammai doesn't really make sense because why would the white one be? We moved to say it's not the white one, it's the black one. And what you really meant, and then we asked a question about who said there were a number of black shvalim, and then we said, no, there must be, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Then we asked the basic question, right? We explained Beit Hillel according to that logic, and he basically talks about where the placement of first is in the sentence, and it doesn't really make sense. That's why it doesn't count. And he actually explains it like the other, which is why he thinks the white one, of course, isn't sanctified. And then we basically asked this question. This is not Hekdesh B'Ta'ut. This is Hekdesh, intentional Hekdesh. That's really what you meant. To which we answered, it's misleading language. And that's what we're talking about, which then led us to assume that when it comes to real mistake, Beit Shammai would say, it's actually it's not valid. It's not going to be sanctified. To which the Gemara brought 2 Mishnayot of the upcoming Mishnayot, which seem to be saying the opposite. The Beit Shammai does think Hekdesh B'Ta'ut is Hekdesh. First one we answered because it was really just Beit Hillel's quote of Beit Shammai, and maybe they misunderstood. But the second answer was the second one we couldn't answer that way, and then we really had a problem. And in the end, we had to say, which again resolves both, which is to say that really Beit Shammai holds Hekdesh B'Ta'ut, actual mistake is sanctified. That's just not the topic of our Mishnah. And that resolves the problem. But it still does leave us with a bit of a question. How do you call Hekdesh B'Ta'ut one thing and another thing in Mishnayot that are kind of in a continuum? Seems a little strange. So Abaye comes up with a different explanation. And his weakness you'll see in a moment. But lo kasal kadatach dekayim b'tzach. It's not like you stood up in the morning and said, the first animal to leave my house or the first black ox to leave my house is going to be sanctified. That's not what happened. You were sitting in the afternoon and you were referring back to what happened in the morning. V'amal shol shachol sheyatsa mi beiti rishon lehavi hekdesh. Now notice the wording in the Mishna. Shor shachol sheyatzei rishon, we said, or yatsa rishon is just a matter of vowels. So he says, it's talking about what happened. And what you said was the first black ox that left my house is hekdesh. Now, that could still be not a mistake, right? But what happened? V'amrule, and then they said to him, lavan nafak. The first one to leave was white this morning. You missed it, right? You didn't see the white ox leave, but the first thing that left your house this morning was white. V'amar lahon, and then the guy responds and says, Iava yadana de lavan nafak lo amr shachol. Had I known that it would have been white, I never would have said black, I would have said white. Meaning, he makes it clear in the end that he thought it was a black ox that came out the door. But what he really was referring to was the first ox to leave his door. And he didn't realize that it was white and he thought it was black. And there's the mistake. And then it's going to be the white one that's sanctified, because what he really meant was the first one to leave the house. And Beit Hillel is going to say, you said it wrong. You were under a misimpression. That's hekdesh b'ta'ut. It's not sanctified. And that really, I see you said in the chat also, that seems to be a much simpler reading of the Mishnah. But there's one big problem with this reading. Mi matzit amar. Well, first of all, there's a whole conversation that's going on that's not mentioned in the Mishnah, which is the white, right? So what the Mishnah says is, you say the first one, let's say you change yetzei to yatsa, the first one to come out, the yatsa lavan, it turns out it was white. And then you have to say, and he says, I didn't mean the first of the black, I meant the first one. And what I really would have, I would have said white had I known. So you have to add that line, which is not too bad, but okay. But here's a problem. The continuation of that Mishnah is problematic, the language, because what does it say? Remember, it's not just the ox case. Whatever we say for the ox has to apply for the next. So, amar, could you really say that it's in the afternoon and he's referring to the past and not the future? Dinar shel zahav sheya'aleh. There it says the dinar of gold that will come into my hand first. To which they say, she'ala, change it. Not such a big change, get rid of the yud. Okay? Get rid of the yud. It's not future, it's past. What about the next one? This is a little trickier. Chavit shel yain sheta'aleh, the barrel of wine that will come up. Tnei she'alta, change it to alta. Here you just have to move the ta to later in the word. Okay, so you have to make these little edits, otherwise it doesn't really work. Okay, so we're now done with our three explanations. The questions on Abaye were minor because minor changes on Tanaitic sources are not too complicated. Again, editing is always a little tricky, but it's not the, it's not the worst. Rav Papa's questions were a little trickier and a little more complicated. On the other hand, he's explaining the word, the Mishnah in its simpler way of reading it, which is that it was all on the future and not on what was past. So Abaye has to shift the whole thing in order to make it make sense. Now we're going to do something else, which is we're going to take a statement of Rav Chisda, and we're going to say that Rav Chisda's question raises a problem with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah raises a problem with Rav Chisda. We're going to have two questions of Rav Chisda. One is going to be from our Mishnah, and then another one is going to be from something Rav Chisda himself says, and we're going to resolve them both in the same way. So now, Amar Rav Chisda, Ukama b'chivar alakya. If you have black, Ukama is dark, and chivar is white, like chiver is pale in Hebrew. If you have black oxen mixed in with your white herd of oxen, it lowers the price of the herd, meaning the black ones are not as good as the white ones. And if you have, this is something totally different and irrelevant to our purposes, but because this was the statement, we're bringing the whole statement. If you have white spots on a black ox, it also lowers the value. Like a pure black is much better than black with white spots on it. Tanan. So now we're going to question this from our Mishnah. This assumes the black is lower in value than the white, right? The Mishnah is going to seem opposite, although we're going to back and forth a little bit. Shachol sheyatzami beiti rishon, hekdesh. The black one that leaves my house first is hekdesh. Hasal kadatach, ki makdish ba'ayin ra'a makdish. Ba'amre Beit Shamai have a hekdesh. If we're going to assume that a person, here's two approaches we're going to talk about. If I want to sanctify something, am I going to take the nicest thing I have in my house, or am I going to take the less nice thing I have in my house, right? Am I happier to give to the, the temple I'd rather give my best of my best? Or would I rather say, no, I want to keep the best for me. I'd rather, happy to give to the temple, but I'm going to give them the less good things that I have in my house. So now, if you hold the makdish ba'ayin ra'a makdish, then Amrei Beit Shamai have a hekdesh. How could Beit Shamai say this is hekdesh? If you said black and then white comes out, and generally white is better, what Rav Chisda just said, worth more. So if I'm makdish ba'ayin ra'a, then you can't possibly, even if you say it's b'ta'ut, you can't possibly say I intended for something higher in value. There's no way. If we assume a person generally sanctifies the lowest, the lower of their things, then white can't be included in black. Okay, so therefore it wouldn't work. So elamai, what would you have to say then? You'd have to say the opposite, which is ba'ayin yafa makdish. People give the nicer of their stuff. So if I said black and white came out, of course I'd be happy to give the white because generally people give the nicer. So that must be what it is. But then elamai ba'ayin yafa makdish. So now you want to say people generally give the better. Well, then the next case in the Mishnah doesn't make sense. We're going to have a zigzag back and forth because we have black, white, gold, silver, wine, oil. So let's go. Black is less good than white. Gold is obviously higher value than silver. Everybody agrees. That's agreed upon everybody. So now if you're going to say ba'ayin yafa makdish, we're going to have a problem. Because how could that be? If I wanted to give gold, I can't give silver instead. I always want to give the nicer. So it can't be possible that I would say, oh, I'll give the silver anyway. The silver was included. Now, I would never give the silver. That's low. I'm a person who's going to give, right? The general is people will give ba'ayin yafa. So now they say, okay, so that's a question on the first, right? Assuming black is less good than white and gold is better than silver, we have two cases that are opposite each other. That's question number one. But now the Gemara is going to say, okay, so based on the second case, it's going to be the opposite. It must be from the second case, you can infer elamai ba'ayin ra'a makdish. So people generally give the lesser. So if you said gold and then silver came out, of course you're happy to also give the lesser because in general people give the lesser. So that's why the gold is sanctified. But then what about the last case? Chavit shel yayin sh'taleh biyadi rishon v'ala shel shemen Beit Shamai omrim hekdesh v'hashemen adif miyayin. Now oil in those days was more expensive than wine. So again, you're back to this zigzag. Wine, oil. You said wine, it came out oil. Oil is better than wine. So we now have, right, again, black is worse, gold is better, wine is worse. So now this would be a question on the second case. And the assumption we made from the second case, which is it must be ayin ra'ah. How could it be ayin ra'ah? That doesn't make any sense in this case. Because if you say ayin ra'ah, then when you said wine, you meant I'm happy to give the low, but I'm not willing to give my oil. So how could the oil be sanctified? So the second one, this second question we're going to resolve very easily. We're talking about in the Galil, the Chamra Adif Mi Mishna. In the Galil, wine is more valuable than oil. Okay, that's clear. But Reisha, Kasha Rav Chisda, but we're still going to have a question from the Reisha because we still have the problem. Okay, so we've now resolved. We're going to move. Right, wine is like the gold. It's worth more because we're talking about in the Galil. But we still have a problem with the Reisha. Okay, what's the comparison? Black, according to Rav Chisda, black is worth less. And according to all the other cases in the Mishnah, the first thing is worth more. So again, we have a problem. To which they say, Reisha kasha the Rav Chisda, so the Reisha is still difficult for Rav Chisda. To which they answer, Amar lecha Rav Chisda, ki amra Torah de Karmanai. Same type of answer we gave before, which is we're talking about depends on where you live. Okay, black oxen are actually generally much better than the white. It's the opposite of what Rav Chisda said. Rav Chisda's statement was talking about the ones in the Karmanai, which is in the Kerman region. According to the Koran, it's in Iran, of modern day Iran. And there, the oxen the white ones were better than the black ones. And if you had a black one mixed in, it would lower the value, but that's only there. So Rav Chisda's statement was said particularly for that region. Okay, so it basically answered it like the Galil. If you want to learn more about olive oil and stuff like that, you can read Flashback this week. It's all about olive oil. And maybe you'll find out why olive oil is more expensive than wine. Why it differed in price. I didn't have a chance to read it, so I don't know the content, but I know it's about olive oil. So now we've lined it up perfectly, because now we say that black oxen are actually better than white in general. Forget Rav Chisda's statement. Rav Chisda's statement was made about a certain area, but in general, the black is better, the gold is better, and the wine is better because we're talking about in the Galilee. So basically, we now line them all up, and it all makes perfect sense. That if you said the higher one, you're obviously happy to include the lower one, because generally, makdish ba'ayin ra'ah. Then you have to say that the Mishna goes by the approach that people generally give the lower, and therefore, if you said the higher and the lower came out, it would obviously be included in what you said, because you're always happy to do the lower, okay? And therefore, it would work. So that was a very side issue of Rav Chisda that we brought up. Rav Chisda seems to contradict or the Mishna doesn't work well with Rav Chisda. How's Rav Chisda going to read it? And we basically said Rav Chisda's statement was said about a different area. To which we're going to have the exact same answer here. Amar Rav Chisda, another thing about Rav Chisda, he says, Ukama lamashve. The black oxen are good, used for their skin. Their hide is very good. Stumaka lebisre, the red ones are for their meat. Chivara leradia, the white ones are good for plowing. So again, they say, V'hamar Rav Chisda, Ukama b'chivara lakia. They said the black one mixed in with the white is going to lower the value. How could that be? If they're good, if people use them for the hide, they must be worth a lot. To which they answer again, Ki Amar b'Torah de Karmunai. He was talking about the ones in the Kerman Province. Those are the ones that are worse, but everywhere else, the black ones are actually very, very valuable. Okay, so again, quick summary. And I did the more detailed summary before of the first part, which was the more complicated, but what we did was we read our Mishnah. We saw Beit Shamai hektish, hektish. We saw the case. We tried to explain what the case is. We have one explanation. We seem to reject it. Then we went into Rav Papa and Abai and how they understood the Mishnah. Was it on the future or was it on the past? And then, right, was it the white one that's going to be sanctified or the black one that's going to be sanctified in the end? There's also a debate about a difference of opinion about that. And then we asked questions on them, resolved them, and then we moved on to Rav Chisda and basically brought a question from our Mishnah on Rav Chisda's assumption and a question from something else Rav Chisda said, and in the end, both were answered very easily by saying, depends where you live. Now we're going to do the next Mishnah, and with that, we'll finish our daf for today. Mishna dar ben Nazir, b'nishal chacham ba'asaro. You became a Nazir, and according to the commentaries, you also you drank wine, let's say, and then you asked the chacham to undo your vow, and he didn't. Okay, he said, no, you're still a Nazir. Okay, for whatever reason, he wasn't convinced by your reasons, said no. Moneh misha'ah shenadal. The fact that you drank wine in the middle doesn't cut your nizirut and make you start from the beginning, like we saw with being impure to a dead person. That's only being impure to death, but other things, no. But if you went and he actually undid your vow, and we already learned this, you already separated the animal, it doesn't make a difference. An animal is not sanctified at all. And everyone agrees with this, to which case, Beit Hillel, Beit Shamai, which you already know. Don't you agree with this halacha? And this is a classic example of mistaken hekdesh. You thought you were a Nazir, it turns out retroactively you weren't a Nazir, and therefore it shouldn't work. Now, Beit Shamai doesn't answer the question directly. And some of the commentaries say, he had a pretty good answer. He could have answered, this isn't hekdesh b'ta'ut. It turns out he was never a Nazir. It's like everything before that was erased. And it's as if it was a person who sanctified an animal for his Nazirite sacrifices when he wasn't even a Nazir, which would be a meaningless act. And that could have been a good response of Beit Shammai. But instead, Beit Shammai responds from a different place. Amrullah Beit Shammai. Maybe Beit Shammai is responding this way because they want to prove that really you should forget that that's not a question of me. But you should agree with me because why? Don't you agree about the following halacha? We're talking about Maser Behemah. The way you would do it is you would bring your animals that were born in that time period, you would bring them into the place. You would then pass them out one by one. They would go into the pen where the animals live. You pass them out one by one. The 10th one, you would put your shevet, your rod, and you would put on the head of the animal, and you would say, Mekudash. Okay? What if you miscounted, right? Classic. Okay, you're counting and you just messed up the count. And you call the 9th one 10th, and you call the 10th one 11th or something, or you call the 11th one 10th, and you messed up. So everyone agrees that the 9th or the 10th, and right, even if the 10th is going to be sanctified anyway, the 9th will be sanctified if you call the 10th, and the 11th will be sanctified if you call the 10th. So there you have it. If that's mekudash, so there you have it. Hekdesh b'ta'ud is hekdesh. Amru lahem Beit Hillel, lo shevet kidsho. It's not because you put the rod on it. That's not, and you made a mistake. That's not what made it sanctified. How do I know that? Because ma ilu ta'avi nechet shevet al shmini val shneimasa shema saklum. The halacha is only about 9th and 10th, 9th and 11th. If you messed up and put maybe 8th one 10th, that's not sanctified. Or the 12th one 10th, no, it doesn't work. Which shows that it's not your mistake that does it. What is it then? Ella katuv shekidesh asiri hu kidesh hachi'i es ha'chadath. Because it's what we call gzerat katuv. They learn it from a pasuk in the Torah. We'll see this all when we get to Bechorah. We have a long time till we get there, but there's a special gzerat katuv where we learn this halacha from, and that's why it has nothing to do with hekdesh b'ta'ud. It's a specific halacha, specifically to Maser Behema. And how do I know it's so specific? Because only 9th and 11th, and it's not 8th and 12th. So it doesn't mean any mistake you make makes it sanctified. No, that's not a good proof. So basically, that's our Mishna, and we will deal with this Mishna tomorrow. That's it for today. Have a great day, everybody. Again, we had the first Mishna, which didn't connect to Nazir. Already, this Mishna connects it back to Nazir and talks about mistakes when it comes to a Nazir. And you'll see the next Mishna, which we already saw, which also talks about mistakes upon accepting upon Nazir. Okay, with that, we're finished for today. Have a great day, everyone.